concept of this of today's presentation is more a piggyback on top of our presentation 3 months ago on our new match color function within ChromaChecker. Before I get into that, quick little commercial. If you're coming to Drupa, please contact us, set up a meeting. We're going to be in the use norm booth, which is Hall 9, stand D34. And we've actually added quite a few new capabilities in our lighting inspector within ChromaChecker, which will be probably showing next month for the next month's second Tuesday. So with that, I started with a prefix to what today's seminar is about. We're not going to go through the actual function of the color match tool within ChromaChecker. We've already done that. We've got videos online on how to do this. What we're going to do is focus on the workflow in terms of when color match gives us a RGB or CMYK value of how to make that printer match, let's say, Barilla Blue. How do you enter that into the file or into your workflow so that then when you do print it, it prints out correctly? So this is a workflow-centric session, and there's multiple workflows out there. So I've tried to take a broad view of this to try to cover everyone's workflow. And we'll go through different options for different workflows based on what you're trying to accomplish. All right. So with that, the agenda is 2 parts. The first part is a quick fundamental review of profiling, measuring, color conversion, and conformance. Because for us to understand how your printer's printing, we need to have some indication of how the printer's set up. Is it set up in a workflow to simulate Grackle? Is it set up to simulate Foger 51? How is it set up? And based on how it's set up, that will tell us how to configure ChromaChecker to give us the best match RGB or CMYK or even N color values to send to the printer to give you the color that you're looking to get. All right. So the first part is kind of a review on the basics. And then the second part is, now that you understand the basics, now how do you use these values to enter them into the workflow so that you get what you want? And different methods include, are you printing? The way I've designed this presentation is, if you're a really basic user, I need you to at least understand if you have color management on in the workflow. And if you do, then we're going to give you a workflow so that you know which profile to enter in the match color so that it can give you a good starting point for ChromaChecker to guess what the optimum RGB or CMYK values are of the printer. Whereas if you're a more advanced user and you're already using spot color lookup tables, which is a kind of an advanced topic, my experience is majority of users are not using spot color lookup tables in their workflows, although everybody should be using them. Like I said, it's a more advanced concept. And in that scenario, chances are you already have a profile for your printer, and you just need to figure out how to get the profile out of your RIP or server, load it into ChromaChecker. So now ChromaChecker can be on the same page as your RIP. So when ChromaChecker says you're trying to make Barilla Blue, it knows how to make Barilla Blue on your printer, and you don't have to necessarily build a new profile because you've already got one. So we're going to cover kind of the gamut, if you will, the range of workflows based on your level of knowledge to get you the color that you want. So with ChromaChecker and trying to color match, ChromaChecker has a number of types of PDFs that you can use to print to your printer. And what I need you to get your heads around is that, for instance, our most basic way to print a PDF to the printer to see if we can get a color match is using this tool called Grid. And this tool called Grid, we have a whole Second Tuesday seminar on it. I listed at the end as a resource. So we're not going to talk you through how to do this. We already have done that. But when you print this PDF to your printer, you want it to print to the printer just like a job that you got from your customer in the most basic sense. So if you're a basic user and you just need a color out of your printer on a given substrate on a single printer, then you'll print this through your normal workflow. And then in ChromaChecker, you'll load the appropriate profile in the color match tool so that the RGB or CMYK values on the grid line up with how your normal workflow prints, which will line up with how your customer files print, so that when you find the visual closest match on this grid to the Barilla Blue you're looking for, you can look at right what the numbers are, change the values in the customer file to the new numbers if the customer didn't actually call it out as a spot color. I mean, most customers, unfortunately, don't call out key spot colors as a named color, which means you need to do a substitution. Now, if the customer does call out a named color, then that's a whole other part of this presentation that we're going to get to later. I'm just trying to show you that there's different ranges of sophistication when you're setting up the color match. And what you're wanting to do is just simulate your actual workflow. The way you're printing your customer job to the printer, you need to simulate it with the ChromaChecker PDFs to give you the best option to match color. So with that, one of the prerequisites is knowing if you're using color management in the workflow. If you're currently using color management in the workflow, such as you've got an input profile of Grackle and an output profile of your HP XYZ printer, then using color match, an easy way to do it, an easy way to use it for a basic user is to use Grackle as the profile within the grid function or within the color match function. And again, this is saying you're not doing a spot color lookup table. This is a really basic scenario that will give you the value you want. If you don't know, or if you don't have an ICC profile for your printer, then ChromaChecker gives you a way to build an ICC profile multiple ways. We have multiple targets. What I recommend is the CC84, CC400 target, which is shown on the screen here, and we have a link for it later. This target's available in both RGB and CMYK color space, depending upon your workflow, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And in this way, you can print it on your printer, use ChromaChecker to build the profile, load it in the color match, and now color match knows how your printer's printing. And so it has a better way to predict what RGB or CMYK value is necessary to make that key brand color that you're going for. And of course, whether it's in gamut or out of gamut. So I've essentially got three key workflows. Workflow, and I list them, well, I show down below that workflows 1 and 2, which are real basic workflows, you'll print this target through the workflow. Workflow 3 is more for the spot color lookup table, where chances are you don't even need to build a profile, because if you're using spot color lookup tables, you've probably already profiled your device. And we just need that profile for each print condition to use in our color match tool. Let's see. So let's go on here and talk about the ICC profile creation prerequisites. So if you have to build a profile, you want to make sure that the condition of your device is consistent and repeatable. Using ChromaChecker, if you're always trying to match your brand colors on a given print condition, one stock, make sure you've got that stock loaded when you build the profile, because paper is the 5th color and 4 color profiling, and paper greatly influences the gamut that the printer has. So you want to make sure that you have the right paper. And in this way, using a profile, we understand the gamut or the range of color that printer is capable of printing on that substrate. And as I said, we have a whole session, May 9th, 2023, on this concept. I'm not going to take the time to go through it, but I list out the steps here. And, you know, I mentioned using the CC400 target. It's building a profile of 400 patches. In fact, this is what the CC400 target looks like. So even if you have a handheld measurement device like a Nix, it's not terribly long to build a profile for your printer. If you have a device like an i1 or a Miro 9, you can knock this profile out in literally less than 5 minutes. Now, is this the most accurate profile in the world? No, it's only 400 patches. So it's doing a lot of extrapolation in terms of the color. But it gives ChromaChecker enough of a foothold to be able to predict what the build needs to be for this given printer, so that it gives you a head start. And ChromaChecker will automatically iterate the CMYK or RGB builds till you get the color that you want, typically within less than 1 delta E, as long as that color is in gamut of the printer. And we'll talk more about what that means in a few minutes if you're not aware. Now, if you went with a IT875 or the TC1617, which has 1617 patches, yeah, it's going to be a more accurate profile. You might not have as many iterations. So if you're doing a lot of iterations, a lot of color match capabilities, you might not want to use the CC400. You might want to use a bigger target, especially if you have an automated device like an ISIS, an IO, or an FD9. But again, it's all context. What are you doing? Are you doing this time or just sort some of the time? Now, in terms of the characterization, as I mentioned, it defines the gamut of the device. And once we have the gamut of the device and we have the color that you're trying to make, like either Barilla Blue, or in this case, I have the Best Buy library loaded within ChromaChecker, all you have to do is choose the profile that is representative of your print condition in the virtual spot tool within ChromaChecker, and you'll see whether or not these colors are in gamut or out of gamut. ChromaChecker does a round trip calculation of the color, and you can see over on the right the delta E's of how close these colors. So like Best Buy Human Blue is a 3.8 delta E out of gamut of the printer profile that we're aiming for here, which means no matter what you do to the file, whatever CMYK values you use for Best Buy Human Blue, the best you're going to get is a 3.8 delta E difference. And if you know Best Buy, that's beyond their expectations. They want everything under a 2. So that kind of tells you shouldn't be using this printer, or at least this printer and substrate combination, to try to reproduce Best Buy colors, because no matter what you do, you're not going to get there. It's not possible with that given printer paper combination. So this is really helpful to know up front before you start iterating colors, whether or not that color is even possible to be rendered on that printer. And another way to look at out of gamut colors is on the right is the gamut display in C-Lab color space of the range of color that the printer is capable of rendering on the given paper. And those dots off to the left are the 3 Best Buy blue colors that are most out of gamut. And you can see they are outside the range of the printing device. There's nothing you can do as long as that printer is set up that way with that substrate. There's nothing you can do to get that color. And so many people have a hard time getting their head around there. Can't I change something to make it? Yeah, you can change the paper in the printer, or you can change the way the printer is configured in terms of how it's laying down the ink. Have it lay down more ink, or a different resolution can change the gamut. But for the given gamut that you've got the profile for, there's nothing you can do. Get over it, fix the printer, or choose a different printer that can render these colors correctly. All right, so now that I've got the profile for the printer, is that enough? Is that all I need? And the answer is no, not necessarily, because if you have an image or if you have a spot color in a CMYK or an RGB device dependent color space, and you go to print on your printer, even though you might have two different profiles for two different printers and two different substrates, you'll get two different color results. And if you notice the woman on the right, neither one matched the woman on the left, because each printer has its own gamut, its own color language, if you will, that it's speaking. And chances are none of the printers match the gamut that the customer gave you in the physical file that you're looking at here. So when you just render that file, whether it's a spot or a CMYK image, when you output it, you'll get different results because every printer prints differently. So here, if the customer defines their brand colors in a device-dependent color space like RGB or CMYK, number one, try to get them off of that, because the CMYK value is only good for one print condition for one printer on one substrate. And chances are that they're not going to know what that one condition is. So if they give you their brand colors in CMYK and you print that same CMYK value on three different printers, even if you have them profiled, you'll get three totally different results. It's a device-dependent color space. You need the brand companies to specify their colors in a device-independent color space. Ideally, spectral. Spectral data gives you the ability to accommodate what effect the light will have on the color. Next best is an LAB value. An LAB value is light dependent, so it's only good for one illuminant. So it might only be good for a D50 light boost. It might not be good for LED store lighting, which could be a major problem. That's why you want customers to define their colors in spectral data, because then you can predict that and accommodate it with ChromaChecker. But no matter, you can't have, well, customers are going to give you what they're going to give you, right? So if a customer gives you the files in a CMYK or RGB color space for their brand values, you need to know that you're going to have to go in and edit that RGB or CMYK color so it gives you the result that you need on the printer. Okay? So obviously, none of these conditions match. Now, this is where profiling alone or characterization alone isn't enough. We need the ability to do a simulation or a gamut match. And when we do this, we typically need to define our goal. I talk about this in our presentation on building a profile, because there's two schools of thought. You can build a profile for your printer so it's scaled down to the gamut that you're trying to simulate, such as Grackle. Or you can, and I should say, or you could build a profile for your printer to be the maximum range of color that it's capable of rendering. And based on what profile you use as the input profile, you can actually render colors to be brighter and more vivid than what the customer actually gives you. Now, this gets a little tricky, because is the customer giving you a file that needs to match to Grackle, or are they giving you a file that they want the prettiest, most vivid color available? So those are two different strategies that you can employ with your color management system in your company. And with ChromaChecker, you can track both of those conditions. So think of two different tracks. One track, maximize gamut. A second track, simulate Grackle. So that depending upon the type of work coming in, it can go through one of these two outputs. And by setting the right input profile, now we're redirecting how the printer is imaging the RGB or CMYK values of the printer to match one another. So that if the file starts in Grackle color space, even though my two printers here print very differently from Grackle, if I set my input profile to Grackle and my output profile to be printer A and printer B, now when the file goes through, I get a similar result. And that's ideally what customers want, a similar result or the same result. I'm careful to say same because no two printers print the same, even with ICC profile conversions set up correctly. Now, if we dig a little deeper, what's actually going on is the gamut is being mapped to the input profile. So think of the file that you get from the customers in CMYK, and your source profile is Grackle. So it's saying, it's essentially assigning it in Photoshop. If you ever assign a file in Photoshop using the edit assign profile command, it's the same thing. So you assign the profile, and now it knows, okay, these are the CMYK values of this file. And then the input profile takes it from Grackle CMYK to LAB, which is the device profile connection space, which is the gamut of the eye, which represents all the colors that we see. And then it converts into the LAB of the output profile, which then goes into the CMYK device value or CMYK device value of the output device, which then gives us this color match. So this is great for images that we want to match across multiple devices and multiple substrates. But for spot colors like Barilla Blue, we don't want to dumb down the Barilla Blue to Grackle CMYK if my printer has the ability to go beyond Grackle Blue and create Barilla Blue, which is outside the gamut of Grackle. So much like the Best Buy colors, you might not be able to create those colors in Grackle, but your digital printer probably has the ability to do that. And so we want to take advantage of the full range of color that the printer has available to it to match spot colors. So it's two different strategies. Process color images, get rendered through the Grackle file into the output printer space, but the brand colors, and this way we get the Grackle images to work, but the brand colors, we want to map them directly into the printer gamut to take full advantage of what the printer gamut has available to it. And we do this using lookup tables. So the name says Barilla Blue, and it says, okay, or let's say T-Mobile Pink. And you'll see T-Mobile Pink is defined with a spectral value over on the left. And when it hits the lookup table, which ChromaChecker builds based on the profile of your printing device, it knows to create T-Mobile Magenta on the top printer using a 674.0. On the middle printer, it knows a 362.90. And on the bottom printer, it knows a different CMYK combination. And in all cases, the colors match the original because they're all in gamut, which they wouldn't be if you tried to dumb these printers down to Grackle and then rendered the spot color. So in this way, you're going beyond the gamut of Grackle, taking advantage of the gamut of the printer and matching the final color. Now, this is a more sophisticated workflow because it requires that your RIP has the ability to support these spot color lookup tables. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And if we look at the details, remember with the image data, it was going from Grackle CMYK to LAB through our profile connection space or CMM into the LAB to CMYK of the printer. For the spot colors, for the brand colors, we wanted to bypass the Grackle profile. So you'll see there's no Grackle profile on the screen here. It's going straight from the spectral or LAB of the brand color into the printer profile. So it's a mapping directly to the output gamut of that printer to give us the color that we need. And that's what a lookup table does. Now, the lookup table maps colors in this way, but we have to identify the color in a unique way. So you should be calling your spot color table, your spot color name something like Barilla Blue or Ritz Red. You don't necessarily want to name them with a Pantone color. And the reason is different RIPs use different Pantone lookup tables. For instance, some RIP manufacturers, I won't call them out specifically, but some RIP manufacturers have licensed the Pantone M2 library on their printer. Some have licensed the M1 library. Some have licensed the M0 library, which means theoretically, I could take my Pantone, we'll call it 185, output on the same printer using 3 different RIPs with 3 different lookup tables, all for the same color, and get 3 different results. Are you kidding me? I am not kidding you. This is happening every day today, and people aren't even aware of it, except when the color doesn't match and the customer complains. Do you know which library your RIP manufacturer has licensed? Are you using the same definition upstream in your Pantone colors? These are things you should figure out if color is important to you. Or what you do is you help the customer rename their brand colors to something unique, like Barilla Blue, not Pantone 286. Do Barilla Blue. And now, when you build a custom lookup table, which you can do in ChromaChecker, and you can load in virtually any capable RIP, now when you output that Barilla Blue on 5 different printers on 5 different substrates, you're going to get the same result. They'll all match, and there's no disconnection. So these are important points to understand when we're dealing with name color workflows. A couple other things about spot color lookup tables. Obviously, you want to make sure the colors are in gamut, as we talked about. Some workflows only support 28 colors, meaning you can have a lookup table in your file which has 28 different lookups, which for like the Best Buy library at 18, no problem. That works every time. But if you are wanting to make a big library, like the ChromaSpot library, or print the Pantone library on your printer, 28 named colors, you can't do that because you need 2,000 lookup tables to have that happen. So again, another thing you need to ask your RIP manufacturer is, number one, can you support spot color lookup tables? Number two, is there a limitation in terms of how many lookup tables you can apply at one time? And many have this limitation, which means you might have to look at getting a supplemental color server, or many of you might already have one, but most color servers give you the ability to apply a spot color lookup table, and they don't have any limitations. So you could do a 3,000 color lookup table and have it render on the fly, which I've done before. I helped a company who they were doing swatch books for their window coverings with paint. And the swatch book was costing like $100,000 to make 100 of them for their dealers. And it was their entire marketing budget. And we were able to show them that with, in this case, it was an HP Indigo, that we were able to render their entire 1,000 library spot book using ChromaChecker and the Indigo lookup table, and make these spot color books available for like $5 each. And so their marketing budget, all of a sudden they got like a ton of, they got what, $90,000 back that they could use for other marketing activities, because they didn't have to do these manual paint drawn swatch books. It was amazing. Now, the way I did that was I literally built the profile with an ISIS a minute before I applied the color conversion. So I knew exactly how that Indigo was printing that minute, or within 2 minutes, applied the spot color lookup table on the fly as the PDF of the swatch books went through, and it rendered on the printer. And we measured the first 20 samples, and they were all within 1 delta E. And The customer was thrilled. So these are little tricks of the trade to actually have you get the color coming out right. So in this way, the optimum way, you should strive, even if you're not using spot color lookup tables today, you should strive to get to that point, because if you're having to render the same brand colors on multiple printers or multiple substrates, the only way to do it efficiently is with a named color lookup table. All right, so now we're going to move into part two. Those are some of the basics, and I tried to get through some of the reasons why you want to use a lookup table and things like this. Now we're going to actually talk about how do we actually apply it in the workflow. And so as we go in here, we actually made a table for essentially 3 different workflows with a 3A coming. So the first 2 workflows are using our tools Grid and Snowflake, which are 2 different ways that you can print the color that you're aiming to get on your printer and look at the variation around the grid or up and down through the snowflake, more yellow, more red, more blue, more green, etc., to find that best color match. So that's workflow number 1, and workflow number 1 is great if you don't have a measurement device, because you can do it straight off of our web interface. Print the target, visually look at the colors and get it to match, which I'll talk a little bit more later. Number 2 is using our match color tool, which is in Capture. And this is what we showed off a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, which allows you to use any measurement device, measure the color coming off your printer, and it will iterate the color to get you the color you want. And it will predict right up front whether or not it can make it to what delta E, and then it'll actually do it with no operator intervention. But the key is, how do you define the profile in the matched color so that ChromaChecker iterates around the right print condition? And we'll talk about that in this section. And then the third option is using a spot color lookup table, which is the only way to do it if you have multiple devices and multiple substrates that you're trying to match. I wouldn't even try to recommend the match color using scenario number 2, because it's too manual. Every color match is a manual rendition, where you want to get into an automated condition with spot color lookup tables. So another way to look at it, when trying to do a color match, do you only need to match colors that are in an existing library, like a Best Buy library that they can give you, that you can load into your ChromaChecker, so now you can use Grid or Snowflake to print? Or does the client give you a color that you need to measure with a measurement device? All right. And then 3, do you need to print matches on multiple printers and multiple substrates? If 3 is a yes, you need to go to spot color lookup tables. All right. And that's what I say there. Okay, now backing up to the most basic scenario, level 1, where you don't even have a measurement device, but you have the color library. You would then take your grid. In fact, you would import the library into your ChromaChecker system. I'm not going to demonstrate this because we have videos online on how to do this, but I'm just going to go into my operator interface through my login from the ChromaChecker cloud. So you enter your operator interface, and when I log in, I choose which printer I'm printing on, and then I choose my Grid or my Snowflake. And when I choose my Grid or my Snowflake, I then choose the color that I'm aiming for. So it could be a custom lab, or it could be a Barilla Blue. So I go Barilla Blue, and I can say I want the Barilla Blue. And now I choose the color space that my printer's printing in. I choose the profile that's most relevant to how my printer's printing. So if I know my printer's set up in a color managed workflow with Grackle, I would choose Grackle as the profile here. And then I would make sure that the Barilla Blue, once I go through the iteration, it'll give me the optimum CMYK values that I would look at on this grid. And then I would choose the optimum RGB or CMYK values based on which blue is the best match. And then I would substitute that in my customer file and I would have it working. So that's essentially how easy it is with the grid and Snowflake. I won't go through all the steps because, like I said, it's in a video. Now, moving to option number 2, which is using color match. The prerequisites are, again, knowing if your workflow is color managed. So you have an input and output profile. And if so, you could use the input profile, such as Grackle, as your color match profile. So in this scenario, we're assuming we're using ChromaChecker capture. So again, I'm logging in with the same credentials that I logged in from the cloud, but this is a client software, works on Mac or Windows, requires a really low powered computer. I've run this on a $100 Windows 10 tablet computer. Fantastic. No lag at all. And I would go into my color match tool here. I would then take my measurement device. Again, I'm not going to go through the steps. We've got it all on video, but the point here is to show you the menu that we're talking about. I need to first save the color because ChromaChecker is assuming that the color's already in the library. So I'm going to just give it a new name and I'll call it Barilla. And I'll call it Barilla Blue. And by saving it, I'm now ready then to go to my color match. And in color match, I'm going to say hey, my device is CMYK. And now here's where I choose the profile for my given print condition. Now, again, if you're currently working through a color managed workflow and you are just trying to get a color out of the printer to match this as quick as possible, it's a one-off thing, you just need to do it, then you could use your Grackle profile here as your device CMYK. It's limiting the gamut, as I shared in part 1 of this presentation. You're working off of a reduced gamut of your printing device, because your printing device, ideally, if you've got it set up to simulate Grackle, ideally it has more gamut than Grackle to begin with. But in this, I'll call it a bastardized workflow, we're saying, you know what, we're keeping it simple for you. You're going to use Grackle as the input profile because that's what it's dumbed down to. And the CMYK data that the customer is giving you for Barilla Blue is it's not called out as a named color. It's already in CMYK. So we have to manually fix the CMYK in the file. So when it prints through my Grackle workflow or my Fogger workflow, that it's going to match the way I want it to. Okay. Now, a more advanced workflow is one where you would actually turn color management off on your printer, build a profile, or if you already have one, take the profile you've already built for the profile, give it a name color, and then we would choose the actual HP profile here that's relevant to my HP printer. Okay, so again, depending upon your workflow that the customer jobs are running through to get to your printer, we need to simulate that with our color match tool so that RGB values are RGB values, CMYK values are CMYK values. As long as we work the same way that your files work, then the color match data that gives us the resultant RGB or CMYK value is extremely useful and time-saving. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So determining the gamut of the printer, as we talked about, if your workflow is using Grackle or Fogra as an input profile, go ahead and use that in that color match spot that I just showed you. If you don't know or you can't access the profile, then you can print a profile target through the workflow to simulate what that's going to give you. And with Capture, the same tool that you use the color match, Capture gives you the ability to build an ICC profile. So when you're measuring a target like the CC84 through the print inspector tool within Capture, once it's measured, you have the ability to click on an ICC button on the left and it'll build an ICC profile, save it on your disk that you can then either load on your printer, load in your workflow, it will already be in your ChromaChecker library so that it'll automatically show up in your color match selection. So in our workflow number 2, where we have one printer and one substrate that we're trying to match, these are the steps that you would go through to simulate the workflow so that when color match starts iterating the color, that it will bring you to where you want. And again, like I said, we've got a whole seminar and a whole video. Links are at the end of this presentation on exactly how to push the buttons in color match to make it work. Again, this presentation is more trying to help you understand what to do, how to render the targets through your workflow so that the numbers that color match gives you, you can actually apply to your files and get the results that you need. Now, workflow number 3 is using spot color lookup tables. And ChromaChecker today will give you the ability to build each lookup table one at a time and store them as a aggregate lookup table. So in the Best Buy scenario, you can go through and manually iterate your 14 Best Buy colors. And in the library, you'll have 14 unique Best Buy names that relate to the CMYK value for your given printing device. Okay. And soon we'll have the ability to iterate all 14 colors at the same time. I know we brought it up a couple months ago. We've had some other priorities come up with our development team, but it is coming. Stay tuned. It's just not there yet. Yes, Beth?
Somebody's asking, can we use a wide gamut input profile if we cannot use an LUT workflow?
Okay, you can always use a wide gamut like a print wide or a ChromaChecker wide gamut profile as an input profile, which essentially artificially expands the color of what the printer is actually printing. And then use your grid or your snowflake or your match color PDF from ChromaChecker through that workflow, and it will work fine. Yes. Hope that answers the question. So now, when we're dealing with a lookup table, again, if you remember back to that slide, we want to make sure that the printer has no color management turned on because we are wanting to render the full gamut that the printer is capable of rendering. Now, chances are, if you're working in a scenario that already is using lookup tables, you probably have a good profile for that printer. And all you have to do is find on the RIP or the color server where that profile is, import it into ChromaChecker's ICC profile inspector. And in this way, it will then show up in color match so that you can use it to iterate your colors too. If you don't already have an ICC profile, then like before, we can actually build a custom ICC profile for our printer, ideally in a non-color managed state with the printer precise and consistent and repeatable on the substrate that's relevant, so that we then use that profile for our color match profile to iterate the RGB, CMYK, or N color values around. Now, this is just a refresher showing that we want the ability to render our profile target directly to the CMYK of the printer, bypassing any simulation profile on the input side. We want to bypass that and get the full gamut of the printer. And once we have that, now we can print out our PDF from ChromaChecker that will simulate what it thinks the best color is. So you'll print this through the workflow, then measure it with whatever measurement device you have. And then ChromaChecker will tell you, okay, you're 2.8 delta E. Well, it predicted that you could be a 0.8 delta E. So then you then print this a second time right after you've measured it. And ChromaChecker will on the fly iterate the RGB, CMYK, or N channel colors to second time. You might get a 1.4 delta E if you're using the CC84 target. If you were using the TC1617 a la IT875, you might get on the second iteration a 1.1 delta E, because the more accurate the profile, the less iteration color match has to do. So the faster it will get you to the optimum CMYK value or device value to give you the color that you need. And then once you've got the color dialed into the delta E that's acceptable or capable of the printer, then you can enter those device values in the customer name, or you can actually make the lookup table. And so when the file comes through with Barilla Blue defined in that file, it says, oh, Barilla Blue on this printer is going to render this way, and you're going to get the optimum result. And just to kind of refresh that, if I come back, here's the actual scenario here. So you got the Barilla Blue, and it knows based on the lookup table how to render the colors in device CMYK or N channel colors, so that you have the same colors on 3 different printers, potentially with 3 different substrates every time. All right, with that, let's move to the summary. So hopefully this has shed light on how to actually print out whichever ChromaChecker target that you're using to match color, so that the RGB or the CMYK values that the printer gives you back are relevant to your print condition. Now, a couple things. One thing I failed to mention at the slide in the presentation is, how do you know if your printer is RGB or CMYK? For instance, I've got a HP color laser over here, and I've got an Epson over here. When I'm printing out on my HP color laser printer, I'm printing through a print driver through the operating system. And I can guarantee you that the print driver, even though inside the printer it has cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks, it's driving it as an RGB device. So when I profile it, I'll use the CC400 target in its RGB mode. And when I do a grid or a match color iteration, I will be putting in RGB values. So in this way, a driver typically drives your printer as a RGB printing device. And one sure way to test this is, and we have a target like this on our CC400 target. On the CC400 target, in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a 50% black and a 50% cyan, magenta, yellow. And if these 2 colors render identically in the CMYK mode, it's telling you it's an RGB printer, because there should always be a visual difference between the 50 black and the 50 cyan, magenta, yellow. If there's not a visual difference, you can pretty much assume that printer is an RGB printing device, and you should treat it as such. If there's a visual difference between the 50 black and the 50 cyan magenta yellow, then it's treating it like a CMYK printer. And in addition, like my Epson, I use different RIPs, whether it's an EFI RIP that I have or my Proofmaster RIP, Print Factory RIP. That device, even though it's printing 8 colors, it's treated as a 4-color, a CMYK device, because the RIP doesn't give me access to the individual channels. Now, if it did, then I could use a program that does extended color gamut profiling and profile that device as a multi-channel device and actually render the CMYK builds for that multi-channel device. So these are different scenarios to help you hopefully understand how to determine if my printer's RGB, CMYK, or N-channel. Because it can be confusing. Just because the Epson has 8 inks in it doesn't mean you treat it as an N-channel device. And just because my HP has CMYK inks doesn't mean I treat it as CMYK. I need to treat it as RGB if I have a driver running that printout. And this can make the difference between getting the color match you want and not. So it's important to understand these variables. All right. So in summary, when we're optimizing matching brand colors, ideally we want to create or import the brand library definition into your ChromaChecker platform. So you do this through importing the CXF file into ChromaChecker. Then, using the virtual spot print, you can simulate, using virtual spot print and the profile that represents your print workflow, you can simulate which colors are in gamut and which colors are out of gamut of that device to know whether or not you should even start working on it. Then you optimize your test target based on your needs, whether it be grid, snowflake, or the match color PDF. Ideally, in an advanced scenario, you'll build workflows. You'll optimize your test target so that you'll easily be able to test color conformance. So for instance, with Best Buy, we've optimized, let's find my Best Buy target up here. We've optimized a color bar so that we can assess if the Best Buy colors are correct with one measurement. With one scan, we can know if all Best Buy colors are in spec. So really easy to build a report to the brand showing, yes, I did reproduce the colors as you've asked me to. Another thing I want to just chime in here on is you need to be careful when you're printing on some unusual substrates. More and more different types of fabric or mirrored type conditions like this, where it's textured or it's mirrored, where it has this really high shine. A device, even like an i1 Pro 3 Plus, will not handle this type of material correctly. That's where you'll need a spherical device, like the CC Sphere, to measure this type of material to not only build a profile, but also to do the best match. And we have a Second Tuesday seminar that goes through how to know whether or not your measurement device is appropriate for the type of material that you're measuring. And if I pop down here, you'll see determining which instrument. This link here, these are all Second Tuesday events, all done within the last year. So every month we do a different Second Tuesday event, and you'll see this session that we're doing today kind of builds on all of these Second Tuesday events. So this session goes through which instrument. This session goes through how to build grid and snowflake. This talks about the basics of measuring, like white and black backing, measuring consistently at the same angle, things like that. This session talks about building a profile. This session talks about creating ICC conversions in your workflow. This session talks about color conformance. This section is the session on match color that I talked about. This link goes to a video that we built specifically on match color. So it's all translatable in multiple languages to show you how to use capture in the match color to follow the steps. This session goes through a section in the manual on name color strategies. And then this text that I put here is suggested text that we wrote up that you should be putting in your PDFs that you send to your customers, so that if they care about brand colors, they have to name the colors as a named color. They can't be giving you CMYK device dependent values and expecting you're going to render this device dependent value on 4 different printers and get a match without a whole lot of work on your side. If they set the color up as a named color in their PDF files, when it comes to you, it'll hit your lookup tables that you've maintained very simply with ChromaChecker, and it will on the fly render the right CMYK value on the right printer on the right substrate without any flaw. But you need to educate the customer on how to set up named colors in their PDFs. Some companies like a Citibank or a Coke, they do this every day. They know how to do this. But the majority of brand companies are not so sophisticated, and so they choose to define their brand colors in device-dependent CMYK, or even worse, RGB or hex values, and now that becomes a headache. That becomes a major headache. So these are the notes to give to the customer, and we have more background on our site that you can point to the customer so that they can start building their colors in an intelligent way, so that it makes it easier for you as the printer to render the colors to their expectations on the printers that you're looking for. We got through it pretty much on time. I hope this was insightful for you in terms of the workflow. If you have a workflow that's different than what I've mentioned, feel free to email me and I'll try to walk you through it. But the key thing is, just imagine that the PDF target that you're using in ChromaChecker to do the match color should just marry your existing workflow. And understand, you know, it's not easy, but if you're serious about matching brand colors, you need to start migrating to a spot color lookup table workflow. It's the only way to do it if you have multiple substrates and multiple printers that you're trying to match the same color. It's a little painful at first, but once you do it, it's so much easier in terms of production standpoint and throughput and getting color right the first time on your prints. So, Beth, any other questions that anyone had?
No more questions, but reminder about LinkedIn.
Okay, yeah, guys, please follow us on LinkedIn. You can keep in touch with all of the seminars that we're doing on here. And of course, if you want to test ChromaChecker out, you can do that very easily. You can go to the chromachecker.com/ let me remember what it is. chromachecker.com/ I think it's trial. Yeah, chromachecker.com/trial. And we have a little benchmark here. It includes the PDF and the ability to download capture. This is more for a G7 compliance thing, but it gets you in the spirit of how to use capture and know whether or not your printer is printing to a G7 condition. And if not, ChromaChecker will iterate a new curve to bring it into that condition and help you understand how accurate your printer is to Grackle or whatever other condition you're aiming for. And if you have multiple printers, this little tutorial will help you understand which printer is most accurate to Grackle, and it will quantify how different the printers are from one another. So these are all things that you can't do with the normal curve type software program. It's very insightful to know which printer is most accurate and how accurate is printer A to printer B to printer C. This little tutorial will show you how to do that. So with that, and until next second Tuesday, which will be right after Drupa, I'll bid you goodwill And if you're going to be at Drupa, please look us up. As I mentioned, we're in the Use Normal booth, and we'd love to talk to you in person. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.